Hi, my name is Martin, and I will be interviewing my grandmother, Bernadette Martin. This is from my Generations Honors Oral History Project. I will start off by asking what generation you grew up in.
I grew up in what they call the baby boomer generation, which was a time period between the mid-40s to the mid-60s.
How does it feel to be part of a baby boomer generation?
Well, sometimes it feels a little overwhelming because we're literally the biggest generation. The time period after the war, people came home from the war, and I guess they decided it was time to have families and have, or have more kids, and there was just like an explosion of babies being born.
Okay, what was it like growing up in this generation?
Well, it was kind of like Happy Days, the show that they used to have out in some ways, but blacks didn't have the same opportunities as whites did. We couldn't go everywhere we wanted to go. When I was a little kid, I remember having to go to the back of the bus and not being able to go in through the front to a restaurant or anything, or sometimes you couldn't even go in the restaurant.
Time growing up in this situation?
It was tough because there was a lot of racial tension. In some states, blacks were being hunted down and killed. We had the Ku Klux Klan that was killing a lot of people. We couldn't come and go as we wanted to go, and there were lots of issues and conflicts, in some areas of the South where there was a lot of violence. It was like there was disregard for black lives. It's kind of like it is today where people are saying Black Lives Matter because so many people are being shot down. It was a similar situation in certain areas, not in every area.
Okay. What was happening when you were growing up?
Well, when I was growing up, there were a lot of protests occurring. Martin Luther King and others like Jesse Jackson were fighting for civil rights, and they were staging protests. Also during that time was when the comic book explosion was out, and Spider-Man was the hit comic along with some of the other X-Men and a lot of the movies that are coming out now. Those comics were out, and I grew up with them.
Okay. What was the biggest news?
Well, the war, the Vietnam War, and the protests that Martin Luther King and the Cuban Missile Crisis, things like that were going on when I was growing up.
Where did you live when you were growing up?
Well, I lived in Arkansas in the South, and the city I lived in didn't have the same issues as some of the others. Little Rock, Arkansas was one of the places where they had a lot of violence, especially when they integrated the schools. But the city I grew up in, it was smaller, and everybody kind of knew each other, and so we didn't have the same problems that some of the other cities had.
What era did you grow up in?
Well, I grew up in the 60s, and during that time, schools were segregated until I was in my teens, and they built this big school on the outskirts of town. Everybody that didn't have someone to drive them to school had to ride the bus.
How were race relationships when you were growing up?
Oh, we had segregation when I was real young, and we couldn't go to certain restaurants, movie theaters. When we went to movie theaters, we had to sit in the balcony, and being kind of bratty at times, we'd drop stuff down on the people below. That wasn't very nice, I know, but kids will do things. But we also had places. I'm sorry?
What did the balconies look like?
Oh, it's like I don't know, out here we don't really have balconies, but it's like a second floor where there's, all the seats and everything are there, and you can kind of see down the floor below you. It's like it's open in front of you, and you have a banister across the front, and you can look down on the people that are sitting down on the first floor.
Okay, was there racial equality in the 60s?
No, not until I reached my teens, it started getting better. But we still have we had places that had signs, no, the N-word allowed. We had some places you could go to with no problems, but then we had some that you really didn't want to go because, things might happen.
Were there any racial protests when you were growing up?
There weren't racial protests in the city I grew up in. We, like I said, most people knew each other, knew the families, knew somebody you were related to, so pretty much we got along. But some of the other cities in the South, different states, especially in Alabama, in Mississippi, there was a lot of racial tension there, and there were protests, and sometimes people got killed. I mean, in Selma, when Martin Luther King went down to the riots, the Civil Rights March in Selma, Alabama, there were a lot of people that got hurt, and some even got killed.
Did you participate in any protests?
Well, the only protest I participated in, and it wasn't anything violent or anything, at our school, at our high school, we all dressed up in black, had a black glove on, and we went to school assembly. We all sat together, so you saw this big group of people all dressed in black, and the school got nervous about it because it was a staged protest of things that were going on, and they had the police out there and everything. But like I say, nothing happened because we weren't violent or anything. We were just, protesting things that were going on, and that was our way of doing it.
What kind of things did you do with your family when you were growing up?
Well, we had school events like football and basketball and all of those things that we went to as a family. And then we had, we would go to the movies together. We would go to the lake where my grandfather had a boat, so we got to ride around, on the lake and everything and have a picnic. We also went to what we call the gorge. It was up in the mountains because the city I grew up in was surrounded by mountains. Kind of like the mountains out here, like South Mountain and everything, but we would go on camping trips. I was in the campfire girls and things like that, so we would go on camping trips and we'd have fun.
Were you in any organizations like the Girl Scouts?
Yeah, I was also in the Girl Scouts because my mother was den mother is what they call them, but it's kind of like a female version of a scoutmaster. So we would go and go up to the gorge, roast marshmallows, tell scary stories, sitting around a campfire, stuff like that, and spend the night sometimes. Sometimes somebody gets scared and they want to go home, but it was fun.
Did you have a favorite teacher growing up, and if so, why?
My favorite teacher was Mrs. Lacey, and that was when I was in the 6th grade. Mrs. Lacey liked to do hands-on things. She would have us study things like the United Nations, where we would all have to pick one of the councils. I was Security Council, and you had to learn what that council did and do a presentation. And she also had us to pick a country to represent, and I picked India, and we had to dress up in the native costume, which we were supposed to make ourselves, but a few people kind of cheated and went and bought something. But I had my sarong thing going around and around my head, and had the little black dot in the center of my forehead, and had my hair parted and smoothed down like they wear their hair, and it was interesting. You know, I liked it.
Would you go back to the time if you could?
You know, I think they call it the past for a reason. You know, that's in the past. You move on. You hopefully do better. You know, you have more in this age. Even though it's a lot of racial tension going on, there are still more opportunities to do things than there were when I was growing up. But at the same time, it seems like there was more family values when I was growing up than there are now.
Okay, well, that's all the questions I have for now. Thank you for allowing me to interview you.
Thank